In a world where uncertainty looms, one mustn't merely survive, one must thrive.
Meow, I'm Huples Cat. Don't know about you, but I get excited when I find a new book on the apocalypse that I've never read and hadn't even heard of. TERMUSH, a novel by Sven Holm. Quite small, $22 Canadian. The back blurb says the only luxury is safety, and this is probably true. An unnamed disaster has destroyed the world outside, but within the walls of a seaside resort called TERMUSH, a select group of guests continues to live life undisturbed. For now. As time passes, signs of the cataclysm begin to bleed into their gilded idyll. For long, their peaceful days have turned into an agonising wait for things to fall apart.
Presenting the Billionaire's Bunker, your fortress of opulence and ultimate sanctuary in the face of any apocalyptic storm. Security isn't just a feature, it's a lifestyle.
So Sven Holm is Danish, so the book is not typical because it's written from a Danish perspective, because things are. It's a really interesting book, and I'm really glad I read it. It was published in 1969. The TERMUSH seaside resort, you have to apply to it, you have to give them money to register, and then you have to give them a monthly stipend. It's an elite resort for people to survive a Holocaust. It's got well-supplied bunkers underneath it.
Only the chosen few enter.
Step inside, where luxury meets fortification. The walls aren't just walls, they're a blend of reinforced concrete and cutting-edge technology. Your refuge is a masterpiece, designed to withstand anything. Our living rooms boast bulletproof windows with panoramic views of the chaos, because you deserve to witness the end in style.
It's reasonably isolated, and the rich plan to go there or be taken there in the event of an apocalypse. Does this sound familiar?
The kitchen is stocked with gourmet, long-lasting delicacies that defy the decay of time. Our chefs are prepared to create culinary masterpieces, even when the world outside crumbles. Rest easy in a bedroom that's not just a haven of comfort, need a break from impending doom. Our entertainment complex includes a panic room that makes you forget the world outside. Enjoy movies, virtual reality, and even a simulated sky with the push of a button. Survival isn't enough. It's about surviving with style, the ultimate shelter for the elite, the Billionaire's Bunker, where extravagance meets resilience. Because when the world crumbles, your legacy doesn't have to.
There's going to be lots of spoilers in this review, but I will point out to you, it doesn't work out as they hoped it would. You may not have heard of Jeff Vandermeer, but if you have, you should read his books, they're pretty good. He does the foreword. It's a really good foreword, and I really enjoyed reading it. A lot of times you shouldn't read forewords until you've read the book. In this case, it was fine. In this genre, the dangers of some calamitous situation become entwined with an almost cheery disaster tourism tone. But more importantly, civilization always wins in the end, even if in an altered form. The militias may hold sway for a while, or the plague lay waste to whole towns, but by the novel's close, equilibrium and balance, logic and order have always returned to human endeavours. Not so much in TERMUSH, but that's a very insightful description of a lot of apocalyptic fiction that people read and believe is real and believe is helping them prepare for a disaster. Instead of a pervading sense of the other about to storm the gates, Holm delves into the psychology of the holed-up survivors and the hazards of societal breakdown. For that reason, if no other, you should read this book. While TERMUSH admirably conveys the reality of living through a nuclear apocalypse, Holmes' greatest triumph lies in conveying the psychological strangeness and the derangement of such a situation. I agree with Jeff. Okay, let's take a deep dive into this book. Spoilers! The opening paragraph. I've been installed in one of the rooms on the top floor here in the hotel. Everything went according to plan, just as it had been run through for us beforehand, on the lines explained in the brochures we received with our enrolment forms. And that's the tone. You're not going to get a lot of character development in this book. The state of panic and anticipation is over and has been replaced by complete deafness, not just of the ears but of the whole body, a sense of exhaustion, deep-seated dizziness. After the disaster event, after responding to it, it's very common for both the mind and the body to actually shut down. This is why you need to have a preparedness plan that's not just dealing with the disaster, but actually includes actions you're going to take in the after period. Everything has changed, yet we search for one single detail which has in fact been altered. Events happened, they've gone to TERMUSH, they've been in the bunkers, they've come back up, outside the window. Locally, nothing has changed for them. Regionally, nationally, globally, the world has been forever altered. They just can't see it. The management has impressed on us that we ought not to feel secure, even though we have stayed a sufficient length of time in the shelters under the hotel, even though all the offices, passages, bedrooms and reception rooms have been washed down and checked by the security men, including the hotel's immediate surroundings. All the guests have been issued with a dose meter and are obliged to enter up the amount of radiation they've received each day. When all is said and done, management and guests are faced with precisely the same situation. Who is the management? So for this guest, nothing has changed, but yet everything has. The sense of loss and dislocation has no obvious focal point. This means he cannot deal with it psychologically. He has no actions to take. We came back from our stay in the shelters to find a world changed less than a summer thunderstorm would have changed it. The management informed us that in a few days they would be setting out a group of reconnaissance men who would investigate the possibilities of making contact with other groups in those districts neither totally destroyed nor still danger areas because of risk of radiation. The patrol would of course be equipped with the necessary protective clothing, but the attempt to make it motorised has been abandoned. According to the last radio reports we received in the shelters, the entire highway network has been destroyed. I think you all should prepare for that. In the event of a massive nuclear war, probably not going to be driving again. Sven Holm doesn't use the obvious tropes of practical fiction, which is why I really enjoyed reading this book. I'll give you an example of that. One of the women suddenly collapsed across the table in front of her in a fit of hysteria. She stared at the doctor when he wanted to help her and continued to shake her head while she repeated that there was nothing wrong with her urine and she would not allow her urine to be examined and there had been nothing in the brochure about this type of examination. She was quietly taken away and the doctor gave her a sedative injection. Women, eh? Useless in a disaster. But the woman's reaction is understandable. What is less understandable is the way the rest of us keep such an inflexibly stiff upper lip without relaxing in argument or giving way to laughter and irritation. Her outburst seems to me more natural than our self-control. It means that neither her imagination nor her sensibility is gagged and bound, as ours are. We have the luxury of safety in TERMUSH. She gets it. The world's gone. It's been blasted away. All of our anchors, all of our roles in life, gone. What about the people that couldn't afford to get to TERMUSH? The day we came up from the shelters, 4 people were found dead on the top steps of the hotel. When the last one was lifted up, the hair fell down on the steps almost like a complete wig. It was the body of a young woman. Her face was swollen, her body was covered with small pimpled sores. They had all died of radiation sickness. If you don't have a bunker, you need to construct one. You need to stay in it for at least 2 weeks and preferably as long as possible for probably years. I am opposed to the management's decision to suppress the news of the 4 dead bodies. By doing this, the management has assumed the role of a superior authority to which it has no right. Again, who is the management? Here the narrator references TERMUSH's brochure. To be a guarantee of help in a situation which may well turn out to be total chaos, according to the unhelpful wording of the brochure, does not mean that to conceal the true facts becomes a duty. When I put my name down for the hotel a few years ago as a guarantee of help, it was because of the hotel's remote situation, its subterranean provision stores, its access to an uncontaminated water supply, its protective shelters and its assurances about security men and reconnaissance parties. I did not pay the initiation fee and the high monthly instalments in order to be placed in statutory pupilli and to be derived with the chance of assessing the situation around me. So again, this is a Danish novel from 1969, and the narrator in this novel is actually a university professor. And in 2024, the idea that a university professor could pay for this type of luxury bunker retreat is kind of laughable. What we all need to do is prepare these individuals to be aware that society changes around us, and we need to change our present because of that, but also that we're also changing. Our internal environment and our economic wealth is also changing.
Portable, transportable cellular phone is here. Quality made by General Electric. This cellular phone features 832 channel capacity, 30 number memory speed dialing, last number redial, electronic lock while not in use, adjustable volume control, horn alert option included. AB system allows both home and car use. Lighted keypad. Take it from car to car. Optional battery available for true portable use. Lightweight. State-of-the-art maximum 3 watts allowed by law. And look at this fantastic low price.
My misgivings about the authority of the hotel management have not diminished. When the radio reports of the reconnaissance party delivered, one can no longer assume that they will be uncensored. Neither can one expect that the guests will resist this censorship. Again, who is the management? And it's interesting, he's talking about compliance. They don't know what to do, so they're just going to be compliant and they'll accept almost anything they're told because they don't want to find out what's actually going on, because reality is very scary. It doesn't have to be a nuclear apocalypse for this sort of behaviour to happen. You see it all the time online. At night, after a short but heavy shower of rain, the alarm was sounded. The radiation meters on the roof and outside the building set off the electrical alarm system automatically. A moment later we were called down to the shelters. There was no panic or crush. Whatever the event was, it's ongoing. The stress of having to respond to it is ongoing. According to the short bridge summary, the group has not encountered survivors in the villages, where only chickens and dogs wander about, stricken by radiation. The degree of radiation is very high everywhere, and almost without exception, it gets higher the further the reconnaissance party move away from the coast. So we're seeing glimpses of the world beyond TERMUSH. It doesn't look very optimistic. At breakfast there was a disturbing incident. The food had been served when the double doors were flung open and a wild-looking man dashed in amongst the tables. Before anyone could get up to support him, he had collapsed and coughed up a thin black fluid onto the floor in front of him. Everyone remembered in that moment the instructions and warnings about touching anything. When the doors were closed, everyone shifted slowly, as if moved by a common impulse, down to the far end of the dining room, away from the entrance, which one could only reach by stepping across traces left by the stranger. Later the doctor came into the lounge and told us that the stranger had been examined and his clothes had been burned to rid him of direct source of radiation. His weakened state was mainly attributable to the fact that he had not eaten for more than a week, but it was still too early to make a diagnosis. He might be fatally stricken with radiation sickness, even though he now appeared basically healthy. Don't burn clothing, don't burn bodies. Bury contaminated stuff that you can't reuse by washing very thoroughly, well away from water and food and soil sources, and try not to inhale anything. You need to be wearing masks. If you do burn radiation material, all you're doing is shoving it into the atmosphere and making fallout much worse around you. The reconnaissance men had approached the first of the large towns. Only in the suburbs did they find survivors. Most of the people had been so badly injured by burns or radiation that they avoided touching them. If people have radiation sickness, it's highly unlikely if you've washed them off with clean water that they pose any particular risk to you at all. Vomiting, blood, diarrhea needs to be removed carefully from the area as fast as possible, but other than that, a person with radiation sickness is not a particular threat to you if you look after them. Everywhere there was a shortage of medicine and pain-killing drugs. Nuclear war is something I've given a lot of thought to since I was probably about 14. I can't say it's either helpful or healthy to be thinking about it to the detail I do. What I can say, if you're preparing for one, you need to make sure that you're going to have pain-killing medications and medicines after the event. You cannot rely on anything external or scavenging anything external after a full nuclear war. What you have is what you've got is what you're going to have to make do with. Does our guest think that TERMUSH is generally known as a centre for survival? Asked the chairman, so that people in the villages and nearest towns have heard about it. The sick man nodded. I think they've all heard of it, he replied calmly. That's a problem with this type of retreat. Everyone in the area is going to know where it is, and everyone in that area is probably going to think that they have a right, even though they haven't paid for the privilege, to go there in the event of a disaster. We expected to find a world completely annihilated. This is what we'd insured ourselves against when we enrolled at TERMUSH. No one thought about protecting himself against survivors or their demands on us. We paid money to go on living in the same way that one once paid health insurance. We bought the commodity called survival, and according to all existing contracts, no one has the right to take it from us or make demands upon it. Sentimentality or uncertainty will not help the stranger and could prevent the inhabitants of TERMUSH from surviving. I prepped, you didn't. You just go off and die and don't bother me. If you do bother me, I'll kill you. Very common in prepping, not going to be the way it is. To expect a nuclear war to annihilate everybody around you, if you survive, is highly unlikely. But that means prepping for long-term survival. Long-term survival means ensuring everybody around you, your local network, after the initial impacts of the disaster are over, can survive as well. This can be very simple things, but it's a mindset. If your mindset is, this is mine, I own it, I'm going to kill you if you try and take it from me, probably going to get killed. I'm sure people are going to argue with that point, but it's something I firmly believe. I'm going to hide for as long as possible, and I'm not going to hand out stuff like an idiot, but I need to have a local community around me to survive years after a major disaster. It's just simply not possible to do it on your own, year after year. Not going to happen. And also, the external world's probably not going to leave you alone. The management has replied to us. The management has assured us that under no circumstances will they make inroads on the store of provisions which are reserved for guests. The management has no difficulty in understanding the feelings of the guests about the injured. It is natural that they should want to help them, but it's equally natural that they should not want the place to be overrun by strangers. The management believes that we can all agree to accept a reasonable number of those in distress with the proviso that the guests' rightful possessions remain intact. The management realised that the harrowing sight of injured and distressed people must be a strain on the guests. This they have taken measures to prevent. One of the security men has orders to patrol the neighbourhood, the outskirts of the grounds, and the drive at regular intervals. If a number of strangers appear asking for help, one of the screen doors in the side wing will be used as an entrance in the future. Okay, so we're creating a two-tier society here. What I found interesting in TERMUSH, and it's a bit of a negative of the book, is that there is obviously outsiders and there is obviously the guests, and of course there's people serving and providing to the guests. The people serving and providing to the guests are not really covered in this book. They're not really acting any different than the guests. I think that may not be the case in a real event. The one who arrived first and the young couple were all well enough to eat. The young man followed the woman into the room with his hand on her shoulder as he did yesterday. They all sat in silence, was served with a meal which was clearly not the same as ours. The new regulations have already come into force. Does this make the guests safe though? But there is no reason why chaos should break out because the alarm has sounded. The limit of radiation intensity, which is set as a maximum, is a point arbitrarily chosen. A rate a few degrees lower than the radiation meters permit could, over a long period, cause more serious damage than an excessive rate over a short period. Absolutely brilliant point about exposure to radiation. You really want to limit exposure to all radiation. And to head into the bunkers is a great idea, but in reality, they should all be sleeping in the bunkers every night anyway. The management has informed us that one of the guests has fled TERMUSH. He fled shortly after the alarm sounded. During the past few days he had collected some provisions. He knew that he did not want to go back down into the shelters again. Again, we're starting to fragment here. One of the guests has actually decided to flee TERMUSH because he can't take the incarceration in the bunkers every time the radiation alarm goes off, which is every time it rains, and every time the wind blows from inland. I have found a little transistor radio. While I lie on the bed holding the small shiny box, I feel excited, almost rebellious. The weak, regular whirring intensifies at one or two places on the scale, but there's not a trace of the transmitting stations. A small radio that you can use as a hand crank or solar power is a great idea. But don't expect anybody to be transmitting immediately after a nuclear war. This morning the management's invited the guests out for a trip by boat. Just before we left, one of the security men went round the corridors calling to remaining guests. I asked whether there were many who were staying in their rooms. He said that everyone who was not on the sick list ought to go on the boat. You said that as if it was not a voluntary activity, I said. Of course it's voluntary, he replied. The trip by motor yacht lasted 3 hours. We sat close together in two small saloons on the sun deck. Each new movement, setting out of the chairs, serving chilled white wine, was remarked on by the guests. Who the management is still unknown. But for these rich people, literally at the end of the world, nothing has changed. While we were away from TERMUSH yesterday, more than 20 injured people arrived at the hotel. The manager had worked out a plan and just waited for a day when the weather made it possible for the guests to stay outside the building. They had, out of consideration for the guests, spared them the sight of the injured and maimed. It had been necessary to turn the library into a place for the strangers to stay, but the shelves for the books and magazines would be put up in the lounge in the course of a few days. The management emphasised that no more injured people would be admitted to TERMUSH. All concerned had stretched their resources to the limit. The management thanked the guests for their understanding. So why did the management do this? The deputy medical officer now threatened to resign if the injured were forbidden access to TERMUSH. You might be wondering why they didn't use nuclear bunkers and nuclear silos for this. In 1969, the nuclear bunkers and the silos were occupied with nuclear weaponry. The management is scared, I said. They are scared lest the guests should take legal action against them, he replied. In what court, I asked. The doctor gave me a rapid glance. The management is also scared of losing its chance of survival, he said. Each injured person represents a threat to that chance. But you, doctor, I asked, what do you want to do about the injured? The sick are my stock in trade, he said calmly. Ever looking for an example of normalcy bias? I just read you one. You must not touch them, said the security man. What was it you were holding in your hand, I asked. Bird, a dead bird, she answered. It is forbidden to touch them, said the security man. They are certain to be infected. You must go into the sick bay and be examined. Are there many of them, I asked? Every morning, he said. At least there are most mornings. And you're not really going to get radiation poisoning from handling dead birds, but you probably shouldn't anyway for other reasons. But this is an omen. The man had run amok in the kitchen, where he'd found some bottles of wine and had drunk or smashed half a dozen. In the meat larder, he'd pulled down the calf from the hook. Nobody had seen what he was doing until he dragged the calf's carcass up the stairs and in his terrified state of drunkenness collapsed in the corridor. He remained lying in the sick bay. The management let it be known at breakfast that the damage was slight and that special locks had now been placed on the doors of the kitchen. In answer to a question from a guest, the management said that no action would be taken against the man who had run amok. It was not the hotel's business to administer punishment, only to take precautions and offer reassurance. So the guests started to go literally insane. But this is a question for you. Should he have been punished? The doctor had given instructions for 12 people to be isolated in the shelters. The guest dose meters show no danger, but the urinalysis this morning recorded a sharp rise in participation of radioactive materials. The food is being checked. Suspicion centres on a bowl of fruit which was left standing in one of the washrooms before it was put on the table. The changed outside is now getting inside. It is as though we, who have not been sent down to the shelters, had been given an opposite diagnosis. Fit, able to survive, uninfected. which of course is not reality, it's illusion. People act strangely in these types of situations. Being better off than others often makes people feel okay. It's actually the basis of capitalism. The management has promised brandy after dinner to celebrate the anniversary of the hotel's foundation, she told me. Yet still life is going on for the rich guests. Do you know why the reconnaissance men have stopped sending radio reports, I said? While they have been staying in the stricken towns, they have forgotten about the holiday guests at TERMUSH. That is what the management is trying to disguise. Unless they have come to some harm, she said, and it's that which the management is trying to hide. I got up from my bed to put on my clothes. Before she went, she touched my arm, saying, "Many of the sick are dead already. The doctor said that they are burying 1 or 2 of them each night. They've paid for the outside not to come inside, but the outside has come in, and now it is very much threatening them all." The disappearance of reconnaissance men, the isolation of some of the residents, the arrival of the sick people, all these facts admitted of more than one interpretation. Early this morning, one of the male guests was taken down to the sick bay. He'd been found in the bathroom, being violently sick, having some sort of convulsion. The doctor diagnosed radiation sickness, but before the alarm was raised, the man himself explained his medical history. He was suffering from advanced cancer of the stomach. A feeling of communal unity, never known before, sprang up among the residents at TERMUSH. The man's crime consisted in allowing himself to be registered for TERMUSH, even though he knew he was going to die. The management had refused a number of applicants. He had given false information in answer to one of the questions on the enrolment form. The condemnation was clear, even though it was not stated in so many words. He's a scapegoat. They feel he denied somebody who's got a better chance of survival a place at TERMUSH. But really, none of them are trying to survive here. They're just acting like guests on a rich cruise line. They're just sitting around, drinking brandy, eating food, looking at what's going on, but not actually taking part in it. The anniversary is over, I said, and the boat trip was not a success, so I would suggest using the alarm. The doctor looked at me quickly. "It may be possible to protect the sick man," I said. "He has not many days left," he replied. "He's already very weak." The boundaries of TERMUSH have become more restricted. Nothing has happened, but the new unity and condemnation act like a protective shelter, built deeper down than the original one, with walls of lead and doors that can be bolted against all strangers. By breakfast time, the news came through that the sick man was dead. The narrator literally thinks the guests are going to get together and kill the man with cancer. They didn't really respond to the guest who went crazy and wasted food and wine. Why do you think they react that way? I believe it's because he's a convenient scapegoat. They see him as somebody that could have taken away their chance to be in TERMUSH. When we had locked the door to the shelter, we were no longer disturbed by the sick people. Out of consideration for us, the screens were not removed and the patients were not taken up to the hotel until we had all left the shelters. So the management is allowing the rich to hide from the reality of the nuclear war, but their bubble of unreality is becoming smaller and smaller. The door was half open and the light was not switched on, but in the light of the hall lamp we could see a man who had hanged himself. He had placed the rope around the wide pipe from the cistern and let himself down from the lavatory seat. He had landed with his legs apart, and one of his trouser legs was darkly stained with urine. People in his survival group were starting to kill themselves. That's a bad sign. I held Maria's arm when we suddenly heard 3 pistol shots. They came from the edge of the grounds, inland, near the place where the drive disappears behind a rocky promontory. We stopped still at the same moment. "It's the security men who are shooting," she said. I nodded, but said nothing and went inside. We're not told who they're shooting at, so again, like the management, who are they? We're not told really what's going on, we're just told things are happening. Very, very unsettling to read a book like this. Early in the morning, a group of strangers broke into the gardens. When they were carrying their injured into the sick bay, they were met by 3 security men with automatic pistols. The strangers gave up their weapons, but refused to be detained. We cannot keep out the intruders in the morning, but preparing to meet them has now become the final duty of our defence. The security men have been held in readiness for 24 hours around the walls of the garden and the building. They've ordered to shoot at anyone who crosses the boundary of the estate. TERMUSH has been designed as a castle. It's now under siege. He told us about the crowd of strangers who were wandering around the countryside around TERMUSH, stricken people from the nearest towns or the more distant cities, remnants of larger groups, most of whom have succumbed to injuries or the big epidemics. The strongest have banded together in search for medicine and food, or towns where all the inhabitants are dead and the stores are untouched. On their way, many of them have heard about TERMUSH. The post-apocalyptic present is coming for the past, which is represented by TERMUSH. It cannot survive. The night was dark, crowded, punctured by sudden shots from the guards. There have been shots several times today. No one knows whether they are all warning shots. One of the guards came in from the garden with an injured arm. The accident was blamed on his carelessness with a hand grenade. In the grounds there was a sudden shot, but I heard no shout. The present reality's war against the past, against TERMUSH, is continuing. 2 of the security men have been killed by the strangers. The morning passed calmly, the guard was changed at midday. Shortly afterwards our adversaries opened fire from several hidden positions in the surrounding country. Their protective clothing had already been removed to be cleansed. They took care to emphasise the number of dead amongst the strangers. After a few hours, the strangers' attacks ceased. TERMUSH is losing the war. Propaganda is being used. They don't talk about their dead, their wounded. They talk about the enemy. This is a common tactic. We've stayed in the shelters. There was a new attack on the guard this morning. Volunteers among the guests have offered to take up leftover weapons and protective suits. There's been talk of possibilities of flight. The strangers have stopped shooting. On the cliffs nearby, their campfires are visible in the darkness. The guards who report this are quite exhausted. It's not sustainable. Bunker mentality, surrounded by strangers who are desperate, isn't going to work. Remember, these are not strangers, these are your fellow citizens. You have common cause here. Could it have been done differently? I don't think so. We've decided to leave TERMUSH. The first killed and wounded among the volunteers have been brought back to the hotel. In the morning, a motor yacht is sailing from TERMUSH. So they're going to flee. Where are they going to go? In the morning, when it was light, the enemy attacked. The attack was beaten off. Apart from some superficial wounds from the shooting, the hotel guests came aboard unscathed. Our soldiers reached the boat before the strangers broke in through the perimeter of the grounds. There's no more management or guests or security. It's them and the strangers. Security is now our soldiers. A wartime mentality is setting in. But it's almost the end of the book. All is quiet in the ship's lounge. The land has disappeared. The sun is strong and warm. Everywhere heads drop down. Bodies are too tired to support them. No one wakes up refreshed. Coffee and rolls are brought round. The heat is powerful. Though we froze during the night, they're having trouble with the engine. Yes, this motor yacht they're fleeing on is having trouble with the engine, but they're still getting coffee and rolls in the morning. I'm not altogether sure if this would actually be happening at this point, but it's a great satire on what's going on. Reality is not represented by TERMUSH. The reality of the situation is very, very much different from what the guests believe it to be and what the guests have paid for it to be. Reality always comes on board. The boat rolls gently. There is no wind. We are half lying in our seats, many with eyes half closed against the sun. No one moves about more than is necessary. Outside the sea is still. There is no darkness and no light. Indeed, they're literally living in a past that no longer exists and won't exist for much longer. There's lots of modernism and postmodern imagery in the book, which I haven't covered, and it doesn't detract from the book in any way, which it can in some novels. I found it to be a short but fascinating read. There is no character development, there is no real plot development, there is no real action, but the whole novel has a sense of unreality, of change without change, of past that is no longer present. It's an interesting book. It shows that humanity cannot insulate itself from the calamity that's unleashed upon the world. If society falls for any reason, the only luxury will be safety. Safety means having a strong local network of people who like you and support you. Building walls is important for security. Maintaining a wall without the local people agreeing that wall should be there isn't going to work. So thanks for watching. I really enjoyed this book. It made me think all the way through it because it's different. It's years and years ago. 1969, it's 2024. The rich are doing the same thing again in 2024. They're buying retreats in New Zealand. They're buying huge acres of land. They're having security people put in. They're building bunkers. They're stocking those bunkers. They honestly think that they can survive a nuclear war or whatever it is that wipes out civilization and just carry on being rich and pampered. You don't hear of them stocking seeds and tools. You don't hear of them stocking large amounts of medications and books so to educate the people around them to actually make society restart in their local area. They're stocking wine cabinets. They're stocking DVDs. It's not going to work. So if you enjoyed this book, please feel free to give me a subscription and a share. That would be appreciated. And just remember, in the event of a nuclear war, you're going to have to bunker down forever, not just for a couple of weeks, and not just when the radiation goes above a certain level. It won't be pleasant, and almost everybody's going to die. And if you try to maintain aspects of life that existed before the bombs fell, it's a mistake. Everything has to change. It's going to be a new world, and you will have to be a new you if you survive. Doodles. Oh, if you've read TERMUSH, let me know what you think about it. I quite enjoyed it. I would give this a B+ or an A. It's not brilliant, it's not Alas Babylon, but it is interesting psychologically. This video has been brought to you by Sleeping Terrier Production 2024.